Cancel the discharge, order a chest x-ray. Got to rule out aspiration.
Incoming.
42-year-old male, Sam Wallace, blunt head with agonal respirations.
Dropped down the T-tracks. Couldn't tube him, LMA in place.
Suicide attempt?
Rescue. He's a good Samaritan. Took a spill helping a woman who fell off the tracks. She's right behind us.
Okay, trauma 1, go ahead.
Welcome to Tonebender's Sound Design Podcast, presented by Sound Ideas. This is the show where we talk with the sonic artists behind our favorite films, games, and series. Check out one of Sound Ideas' latest new libraries, the General HD Volume 6, which brings over 4,000 new effects to add to your arsenal of sounds. From the deepest depths of the ocean to the highest peaks of the mountaintops, whatever the mood or circumstance, General HD 6 will cover it. This new library comes with rich metadata in UCS format and is available in 24-bit 96K resolution. Head over to sound-ideas.com to learn more. Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I will be your host today as we dive deep into the emergency room at the fictional Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Hospital in the intense medical series from HBO called The Pitt. The series takes place over a single day, with each hour-long episode covering 1 hour of real time. And what a day it is. From burn victims to gunshot wounds, emergency births, we follow the ER staff as they navigate the patients and their own trauma as well. The sound work in this series is really impressive because there's very little music in the series. In many scenes, the sounds of the hospital's many life-supporting machines play the role of the score. As the beeping speeds up, the tension builds. As the ER area fills with more distressed patients, the noise floor balloons. The lives being saved off-screen as the injured scream and the staff call out their procedures in deep medical jargon. All of this is built meticulously by the Pitt sound team to push the show to another level of tension and intimacy. I'm happy to have 3 members of the team with me today. First up, we have the re-recording mixers, Todd, Grace, and Ed Carr. Ed has worked on amazing shows like Shameless and a ton of the recent Star Trek series, Strange New Worlds, Section 31, Discovery. From futuristic sci-fi to the extreme realism of the Pit, that has to be a fun back and forth. Welcome to the show, Ed. How do you navigate that?
Thank you. Quick to point out that we are a team. Todd and I have been working together for about 20 years. Yeah, I do the sound effects and the Foley and backgrounds. Bryan is relatively new to us in that we've done a couple of series with him, but he does most of the heavy lifting on the Pit.
So next up, we have Todd Grace, who obviously by default is doing the dialogue and the music. Todd's IMDb is very closely matched to Ed. So as Ed just said, I'm assuming you guys come as a team and always work together. Do you remember what the first show you worked on with Ed was, Todd?
I do. Actually, it was a film by Werner Herzog called Rescue Dawn.
Wow.
In 2007, I want to say. We're getting there. We're 18, 19 years here. So it's been a lot of fun. It's great being able to mix with one of your absolute best friends. So it's been fun.
That's amazing to hear. That's awesome. Finally, we have the Pitt's supervising sound editor, Bryan Parker. Bryan and I actually spent a bit of time together back in February while he was madly finishing up this series. It's great to talk to you again, Bryan. Are you a little more zen-like now that the series is fully in the can?
I had a couple weeks there, yeah. I'm on to another thing now, but I did get some decompression time.
Excellent. Well, as I mentioned in the intro, there is little to no music in this series. At 15 one-hour episodes, this is a lot of time to cover without the crutch of music to help tell the audience how to feel. But one of the places where there is music is right off the top of episode 1. It starts with this jangly, happy, super pop rock song, and we hear it until our main character enters the ER. He takes his earbud out, and that's when everything changes. We don't hear music again, I don't think, for the entire first episode. It's an interesting kind of subversion because when you first watch it and you hear this super happy, jangly song, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a hospital show like Scrubs. And then he takes the earbud out, and everything changes. And within 12 seconds, you're like, oh, this is not Scrubs. This is not Scrubs at all.
It's not like Scrubs.
It was an interesting kind of bait and switch off the top. I really enjoyed that.
I'm really glad that that was the experience that you had, because I'm certain that was the showrunner's intent, and I think that was our intent as well. So that's great.
Yes, we jump into Pittsburgh as a city first. An ambulance passes our main character, and then we follow Dr. Robbie in. And I think that Todd did a wonderful job with the transition between that full music up over the establishing shots, and then it transitions to where he takes his earbuds out, and we hear them just a little bit tinny as he takes them out. And then we're into our world with full of patients who have been there for hours, and the frustration that goes with each individual story.
Todd, do you want to talk about that music transition?
Yeah, I mean, I think the intent was there from the offline to do it, something like that. Bryan had built a really nice, rich and dense world around it. And so that we spent a little bit of time. And again, something to emphasize on this, this was a team effort. Bryan has kept some amazing stuff for us, both the dialogue and the sound effects. He did a terrible job with the music, frankly, only because he had nothing to do with cutting the music. No, it was really well laid out. So once I heard kind of what he had built around it, it was pretty easy just to do the little pop in and then kind of get out of the way. And then, as Bryan said, we're kind of in Dr. Robbie's world, his headspace, so to speak, from that point on for the next 15 hours. And then Ed had to do all the building of that.
What I really loved about this show is that it's constantly world building off screen. There's very few spaces in the ER. And for the most part, the show takes place entirely in the ER. We go into the parking lot a couple times, with the exception of like the family room, which is quite quiet. Even if there are doors, they're open. There's a couple scenes where they make a point of closing the door, but there's constantly someone else's life being saved off screen, someone else's familial drama happening off screen. That takes a lot of work to make it play. You can't just throw random sounds in there. Ed, do you want to talk about how Bryan's tracks arrived and how you tackled mixing them?
Sure. When we started on the Pitt, obviously, maybe to just track a little bit how this comes about is that we watch the offline. Bryan builds all those tracks, and then we get it. Hopefully we watch the offline and we get a kind of idea, roadmap of what they plan for these scenes to sound like. I think on the Pitt, especially on the pilot, knowing that music was going to be pretty sparse, we kind of went with the intention of trying to create all those environments to keep it very busy and keep the sound field at least energetic so people didn't feel that lapse of music. Probably in the pilot more so than some of the other episodes, we kind of had to peel those back. We made it very, very, very rich. And then we were kind of in real time told, no, this is not what we're doing. We want it to have this particular sound here and a radical shift. If you're watching the Steadicam guy, or if you're following the Steadicam, and you want to move with that camera, which was very difficult. Thankfully, Bryan had everything laid out a great way. He also had identifiers and all the scene breaks on Pro Tools so we could kind of see what was going on. And in addition to that, our showrunners had provided us floor plans so that we could actually have a big paper layout, and we had it taped to the back of the credenza so that we could turn around and kind of see where we are. So kind of get a vibe of...
He's talking like a 4 foot by 3 foot, like a huge, like blueprint size that we all referenced.
Yeah, it's amazing. Completely amazing that we would constantly go back and forth to that after they kind of guided us through that to go, okay, now we're in this space, we're in that space, and trying to make those all very specific. It took a bit. On my side, it wasn't because of Bryan's stuff. It was just trying to find the overall sound of the show.
Any pilot, we're working with the filmmakers and the writers, and we're trying to find what is the feel for this particular piece. And this was no exception to that. I think, again, it was laid out so well, it was easy to get to what they wanted. But, it's a bit of a team effort, like I said, having to go through and find where were you going to feature? Where am I going to feature? Where are we both going to go in hot and heavy? And Bryan very patiently nursing us through all of that.
I'm glad that you mentioned the map, because I was thinking, like, the mix room must have been Ed constantly going, where is this taking place? Are we screen left? Are we screen right? Is this behind us? How do you keep that in a cohesive feel? Okay, listeners, I'm going to just jump in here real quick to let you know that they've supplied me with a photo of this map that we're going to be talking about. So while we're talking about it, you can go to tonebenderspodcast.com and navigate to this episode's page to see the map and kind of understand what we're talking about. Okay, back to the episode. Bryan, did you have the map while you were cutting, and did you make notes on the map of which scenes are in which spot, or was it simply just every new scene, Ed, was where is this part taking place off screen?
Pittsburgh Trauma Medical Center, fictional, has 3 wings. We decided as a convention, the bigger we, showrunner, Scott Gemmell and John Wells and us, the sound team, decided that the North Quarter would be calmer and that the hub, the main nurses station in the center, is the busiest place. And then so South Corridor is a little bit busier than North Corridor, but not as busy as the hub. The West Wing goes over towards the elevators. When you look at it, it's not like there's 6 different districts. It's a finite number of locations, and then it's all just proximity to that busiest center. That's what it is. Using that as a rule of thumb, she's standing next to patient room 11. So she's just around the corner from the longer stretch that goes towards the hub. Okay, cool. So the different ways that we play that and use that to our advantage to make this scene pop from that scene or this scene transition smoothly. If, like Todd said, if the Steadicam's moving around a corner, then we want our sound to move with it. In the interest of increasing our possibilities for the shape of those transitions, I asked my sound effects editor, Josh Adeniji, to build extra handles. So on plenty of shows, you're like, okay, is this an action show where we're doing 2-frame in and out background transitions? Or is this something with a little bit more emotional character? We're going to do 4 or 6 frames, so it's softer, blah, 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 blah. This isn't that. This is if we're coming around a corner, we're doing 1.5, 2-second fades between this environment and that environment. So that way, if Ed and everyone else involved wants to make that transition sharper, then we can do it on the faders. We can modify the shape of the fades, whatever. But at least it's all built so that if we want a smoother transition at any moment, we've got it. We took this as far as in Loop Group, we started doing takes where I would line up the people that are in the North Corridor, 4 folks here and then 4 folks there. These are the North Corridor folks, these are the South Corridor folks. And then I want to move the microphone stand past them so that we move with the Steadicam, move past these voices and then towards these other voices. So those transitions are baked into the recordings. This is only possible because Tammy Treadwell over at Warner Brothers ADR has a very, very, very quiet, sturdy, big microphone stand that didn't make any sound or any trouble for us at all when I was doing that. I would stand there with my clipboard, my ADR notes in one hand, and I myself would move the microphone stand with the other hand. All this is designed toward being with that motion and following this this really fluid, and it all ties back to story. It all ties back to the broader goals of the show, which are there isn't really a break. I mean, you see somebody eat a sandwich 3 times over the course of the series. The rest of it's just go, go, go. So their transitions, they're conventional scene transitions too. I'm not saying there aren't between the waiting room and one of the trauma rooms. There are, but there's so much fluidity so often, and we built some specific devices to accomplish that.
You talk about the difference between the quieter areas and the louder areas, but there are 2 episodes in particular, I believe they're 12 and 13, where a mass casualty event happens, and there's no quiet at all of a sudden. The entire ER is turned into, at one point they say, I think there's 85 patients and they're we're only halfway through. So there's so many people and they're not with just little broken bones. These are very seriously injured people. All of a sudden, what I'm assuming is Loop Group becomes super important because we have to feel the intensity of the scene going on. We have patients moaning, patients screaming, tons of medical jargon just being flown around. That's I'm asking 2 questions at once here, but a super interesting thing about this show is that they are just spitting out medical jargon constantly. And as a viewer, I don't know what the hell they're saying, but through the acting, it's almost like ratcheting tension, how fast they're saying these words I don't understand. Almost becomes musical in a weird way. Because I don't know what they're saying, but I can tell it's goddamn important and it's got to be done now, kind of thing. Sorry, so I've asked you 2 questions. One, how do you handle Loop Group for after the mass casualty event? And then we'll get to the other question about medical jargon. Or maybe you can tie them together.
That would be tricky. You've picked up on something interesting. I have a question for you about your first question, but I want to address your second question first. There's a magic trick in there, right? Where the writing is so tight. The writing is sewn so tight on this show that the medical jargon hits you really fast. And for folks that are familiar with that medical jargon, they'll know what's going on, but only about 4 seconds before you figure out what's going on, right? So there isn't a huge gap. You're not like left for half a scene or half a minute or like, is that good? Like the writers did a very cool thing in there where they hit you with the jargon first. Picture editors on this show do an incredible job of getting the reaction shot so we can see how grave the diagnosis is right away. And then they follow up with either a direct explanation to one of the medical students or an explanation to a family member or simply doing the showing of a procedure of some kind so that you don't really feel behind. It would be easy on this show for people to just not know what's going on and not really know what the consequences down the road would be and be kind of lost, right? But they pull off this really cool trick. To that point, Dr. Joe Sachs, who is an EP on the show and practicing emergency medicine physician, gave us a lot of direction and spotting and was there on the playbacks and ahead of time gave me and Loop Group documents of examples of real conversations that a doctor would have with nurses. So like all of those background conversations are the real deal.
It certainly feels that way. Even though I don't know the words, they're all delivered with such integrity. Clearly, the actors/characters know what the hell they're talking about. And you're right. I even though I don't know what they're saying, I never felt lost. It is quite a magic trick. So how did that translate to the ADR stage? I'm assuming the actors you had weren't fluent in the medical jargon and such.
It's funny. I have a pretty good working relationship with Mark and Patty at the Loop Squad. We talked a little bit about Loop Group actors for this, and we specifically sought actors that had experience on some medical jargony shows. So you're right, there's a certain amount of just like plowing forward with the confidence. Maybe you go over the pronunciation a couple times ahead of time and just move forward with it. Pretty rare for them to stumble over some of that jargon. I'm not going to say there was never a take two with a corrected pronunciation. By and large, we hired good actors that were familiar with this particular type of content. It's very common for them to come in with a bunch of their own research, and they did. And sometimes we would weave in the conversations that Dr. Joe gave us in with some of their existing research. One of the actors even had some kind of like a paperback medical. It wasn't a textbook exactly, but had examples of medical cases. He would just flip through that in between takes and be like, okay, here's something. They just had some of the real McCoy ready to go,
Years ago, I was given the personal sound library of an older sound supervisor. This collection of sounds is solid gold, just wonderful sounds he recorded himself over his long career. The sounds were great, but the organization wasn't as fantastic. Copies of audio files existed in many different folders, causing lots of doubles and triples of sounds when I scanned them into SoundMiner. Some of them were exactly the same, while others were the same audio content, but with different file names. It was endlessly frustrating. For a long time, I've wanted to find a way to rid my library of all these redundant files, and I finally found my answer. The SoundMiner Database Companion, or SMDBC. Using this amazing app, I was able to point to my main database and let it do a basic scan. Right away, it found over 11,000 files that were duplicates. That's just based on the names and the basic data from the files. Next, I did a scan of the actual audio content in each file, and it found another 12,000 files that were matches. SMDBC is extremely easy to use and does not erase anything from your hard drives unless you want it to. It simply cleans up your SoundMiner databases, saving you time and effort on all your future searches. It's as simple as that. It also has some great metadata features that I've not even had a chance to dive into yet. But you can learn everything it can do by heading over to smdbc.com or look in the link in this episode's description in your podcast app. While you're there, you can get 10% off your purchase by using the discount code TONEBENDERS. Between the basic search and the audio content comparison scan, I got 23,000 hits. So go grab a copy of SoundMiner Database Companion, use it to clean up your sound library, and see if you can get even better results. Todd, was mixing the medical jargon, the pacing of it, was that something that you had to get used to?
Actually, Bryan handled so much of that in the way he prepped the tracks and he cut it. But I think the thing is taking loop group and it's sort of writing that fence line between dialogue and sound effects, right? Especially in a case like this, because as you said, there's always something happening in the background. And Ed's also, he's mixing some background offstage opera, as Ed likes to call it, that's happening. But we're doing the same thing with the loop group as well. So we're trying to make sure, okay, that's hitting that character and that's hitting that character. And we're trying to sort of just treat everything as just some environmental piece. The rapidity of the dialogue, as Bryan said, the writing is just awesome. The editing is awesome. I feel very fortunate that we just happen to get to work on this particular piece of theater. The stories are great. The acting is ridiculously good. It felt really good. I mean, I think if we came across some kind of a stumble in loop group or something, Bryan would fix it on the spot. Or, we as a team would say, let's maybe bury that one and let's focus on that one. We felt like we were part of the trauma ourselves, pretty busy mix, and we didn't have as much time as I'm sure anybody would have liked to get through it. So we felt like we were a little bit in the trauma room with them. And we just had our heads down and just went for it. It was a blast, actually. It was one of the most enjoyable projects I can remember being on in quite some time.
Ed, the lack of music means also a lack of places to hide. A lot of times when music cue can hide stuff going on in the background. Did you feel overexposed there without the music cues?
I would say never felt overexposed. I think we've all been on shows where maybe the show itself didn't work. So you need all the crutches possible to kind of make those scenes happen. With this show, we watch the offlines ahead of time. Sometimes multiple offlines, just because you get into the show, right? The shows are so solid. It's just trying to stay out of the way, but still contribute, right? So, okay, this scene's going to be problematic because of, maybe a scene transition or something going on, but it was never a point where, it felt like, this is a dead moment. This is hurting right here, and thankfully there's enough dramatic moments that we use, especially the quiet rooms and those kind of things that are usually a pretty dramatic point in the show, that the silence is awesome. Perceived silence. There's hardly ever a time that I think we've gone to complete silence in the show, but as far as effects wise, but Dr. Joe, as Bryan commented on, kind of keeps us always honest. We'll be going through a show and he goes, oh no, he's tachycardic. He's not in arrhythmia. And we're like, okay, cool. What does that mean? And then he'll be like, no, Bryan, that's got to be like 120 beats per minute as opposed to 89 beats per minute, and all my tracks say exactly what it is. So Bryan will go back there and he'll start cutting more in the right. And Joe will be like, yeah, that's right. And then it should change here. So almost in real time, we're changing this, particular patient's heart condition, which is something that you're picking up on as a pulse, right? So in that place, it takes place of music. So we're keeping a constant steady rhythm. You might not be aware of it. We might try to play it under a little bit so it's not so dramatic, but it's still something that the doctors out there pick up on very clearly and they know if it's real or not. So it's cool.
A whole nother level of realism I didn't realize was going on. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it was in 102 when we learned what AFib meant, atrial fibrillation. Sort of slipped through the cracks in our spotting session. AFib means that the heartbeat is irregularly irregular. It's almost random. It averages out to some number, sort of quantifiable number of beats per minute, but it's not rhythmic. That's one of the very few things that, like I said, slipped through the cracks in spotting. So I had to cook up a fix for that on stage during playback, which is fine. It was fun. It's good. I got my own heart racing a little bit. I built a preset into Pitch and Time Pro to draw it through the graph, to made it like a semi-random graph in Pitch and Time Pro to affect the timing, and then applied that to the beats. Now that shortened and lengthened the actual length of the beep. So then I applied that to the existing heart rate and then did strip silence to get that timing all right, and then took the correct length of heart beep and timed all those to those shifted around arrhythmic.
So that they were the right length.
Yeah. So that was fun to do live.
Wow.
But most of that tech, there's the heart rate monitor, the blood oxygen monitor, and the blood pressure monitor. Those three things are spelled out, defined in the med tech notes for every episode, not just for us, but for the props department. So I get those, sort of highlight what's relevant to sound, and relay those to our other sound effects editor, Roland Ty. And he handled all the beeps and mechanical ventilators and stuff like that. We partitioned off the work, so he handled all that stuff. Josh did everything else. And then I shared the pitch and time preset for AFib with Roland. I was like, hey, if this comes up
Nice.
again, here's the procedure.
There's something that happens in the show that while we've got the re-recording mixers here, I always want to talk about because it's something I find very difficult to do. The end of, I believe, episode 2, Dr. Robbie, our main character, has to go and tell parents that their son is brain dead. Essentially, he's not coming back. And the way this is framed for the viewer of the show, Robbie goes into the room, the door closes, we can't really hear what he's saying, but we can see them. But then the mother reacts, starts getting loud, and we hear her through the door. Then the door opens, we hear her more clearly. Then the door closes again, it's muted again, but it keeps getting louder, and the camera kind of backs away. That's not an easy thing to make play right. Do you want to talk about, maybe, Todd, do you want to start with how you tackle that?
We try to watch the offline, and they did something like that in the offline. So typically, when we watch these offlines, we're watching kind of with our ears, if that makes any sense. So we're saying, I see what they did. I'm seeing what they're going for. I have an idea for that. And typically, that's how those things come to fruition. So thank goodness the filters, and I use Pro Q3 like pretty much everybody else in this world. And the filters are so good, it was easy to find filter settings that kind of worked. That, as you correctly pointed out, the setting the levels that make sense during those transitions is what sort of makes it play or not. Just balancing with one another, really. So Ed and I working together. And, I'm hearing what he's got in terms of the background shifts and what's going where, and then where I need to take the lead, I am. We're not just treating the EQ. Obviously, we're trying to put them in a room. So we're giving, I believe I gave her, in that case, her own separate treatment for the room that she was in. That married to the broader room sound that we have in the wide emergency room area. It seemed to work quite well, but it was a little dicey. Like you said, it's tricky because, it's easy to go too far one way or the other. And I'm fairly certain that we did at one point. And we just pull it back and make our adjustments. But again, the team of it all was just so great. It's just so easy working with these guys. We collaborated on pretty much all of these decisions. Like, I think we could go a little bit more here or a little bit less there or way too far, whatever the situation was. It was fun. It's like there's kind of a hand-to-ear coordination, if you will, between where we're seeing on screen and where our hands are on the faders, and trying to make those all make sense together.
And there's a dance for Ed to play there as well. In order for us to feel the silence, the BGs and the surrounding noises have to slowly kind of disappear as well and then come back. How do you figure out where the line is of when you want those to start dropping and such?
I go back to what Bryan said earlier, is that, they've created these tracks that have overlaps, right? So I remember in that particular scene, there was like 3 perspectives, which happens a lot in our show. We'll follow a steady cam guide, then we'll have a hard cut where it's a POV that's maybe 180 degrees from where the camera is, and then they flip flop. Bryan will create those tracks, and I'll be going, okay, let me see where I can fade out of that space into the next space. And sometimes I have to draw those out, make them a little longer in order to make those transitions smooth. And sometimes they break the 180-degree rule, which sometimes, when we're following Steadicam stuff, we'll try to pan stuff. Todd will be doing, we kind of see where we're going. Bryan's created these tracks that go long so that we can take characters in and out. We can take the Foley and move it over to the rear surrounds, and Todd will do the same thing with group. We do those kind of things. And sometimes you go, oh, now they're on the left side. They went out the right, but they're on the left, So then you're going, okay, we got to fix that or take it out earlier. So you make all those transitions. With that scene, we kind of set it up. A little background is that we kind of race through the show on day 1. Day 2, we try to get in front of Bryan and Terry Murphy, our producer. Hopefully we have a pretty good idea of what the show sounds like. We've kind of gone through it a little bit. We know where the bodies are buried. Then Bryan might sit there and go, hey, they really want to make this a moment because in spotting they said, hey, maybe we want to take those out a little bit sooner. We want to really focus on this part. At least we get it in front of those guys as well as ourselves to watch it and go, okay, is this working dramatically? Are we going out at the right spot? Are we crossing from this environment to where Robbie's at? Obviously you want to hear the mom because that's the emotional content of it. and the backgrounds can just start to disappear. Done that a couple of times in the show. Along with our floor diagram, it makes it a little easier to kind of go, okay, where are we going? And sometimes the depth of field on the camera is a little misleading. So you think you're much closer to maybe the hub or one of the exam rooms or trauma one or wherever we're at, where in actuality, you're like 5 feet away. So then you kind of sonically make that happen so that hopefully the viewer doesn't realize like, oh, these guys are playing a game here. They're doing a little magic trick. A lot of times it's just watching it back, with our crew. Is this what we want to do? Is this what we want to present to our execs, for one? And is this dramatically what we want?
Yeah, this is one of those shows where we're fortunate enough that for the first couple of days, we get some legs under it ourselves without the clients around at all. So during day one, I was usually busy with ADR for the next episode. Most of the time, I would check in as possible, but I mostly leave Todd and Ed alone for the first day, and we do my playback on day two sometime. Make sure that all our goals are aligned. The floor plan and the literal fact of where a person is relative to the camera will get you pretty close. At the end of it, though, you have to be like, well, does it play? It's like, you just have to watch it together in context and say like, I really feel her feet jump from this side to that side. I don't buy it anymore. All the other distractions away, just watch the thing. Does it make you feel the way you want to feel? Or is there some aspect that's distracting that we can get out of the way?
If there's good ideas, and I'm sure when the show's being put together, everyone's got their ideas. I have an idea of how a treatment's going to work. It's got an idea of how a particular move is going to work. And Brian's had an idea from the beginning when he built it. And then you sit down and you watch it all in context, and some of those ideas go right out the window. But again, it's been very collaborative, and we all get to work together and say, all right, no, I think this is better. And I don't remember too many cases where we're more than a couple of inches apart on how something should be played, and pretty much, fortunately made the client happy in most cases.
We've talked about intense scenes like parents finding out their child is dead. There's lots of other stuff. There's also very, very funny scenes. There is a recurring theme of one new doctor. It's his first day, and he has to change his scrubs like basically every episode because bodily fluids are launched at him constantly.
Poor farm boy.
Yeah. There's also fun sound effect moments like that, Brian, where you get to let the pressure release a little bit with that kind of thing. Do you want to talk about the idea of designing sound for medical procedures and fluids flying across the room?
This show isn't flashy with its sound, I started to figure this out when I did a film called Rebirth a couple of years ago. That was a film. I read a script. It took place largely in a medical environment. There was some medical gore. It was a horror movie. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. We're going to go way over the top. We're going to make this like huge, like, it's going to be body horror. Cool. And built certain things that way. And then when we actually got into the mix, we found that it was actually way more effective if you just push all of that back into the production noise. If it just all feels, they caught those sounds, quote, in camera, unquote. In a medical context, doing a hip reduction, like popping someone's hip back into place or something, if you were to push it too loud and like over the top, like fun, that's actually less effective. And that makes the audience feel like jump, like feel it in their chest or in their throat way less than if it feels like a real thing they're watching. There's a particular instance in 102, the guy with the facial fracture. I spent so much time on that 4-frame sound, there's a few different layers in there. I spent so much time just like moving the thunk a little earlier before the snap. No. Moving the thunk a little later after the snap, and like the little bit, tiny bit of wetness. What if the wetness doesn't come until after, I must have built that a dozen times at least until it, with the production sound and the level of the surrounding dialogue, it just, that third thing that happens, like you see a thing, you hear a thing, and then that other thing in your brain that glues them together is like, yes, this is correct. And when that happens, and it's like, it's the sound that you can picture, you as a human being can picture on a human scale inside your own head.
Oh, it's what it is.
It just feels so raw. So none of this is hyped. And the Captain Morgan hip reduction in episode
3, I think.
3, 4? Two things. One, we tinkered with a little bit on stage, and then Dr. Joe was like, give it just a little bit more bass. And we're like, really? More bass than that? Really? And then we like tried it, and he was like, that's exactly what it sounds like when you're in that position. When you're like holding someone's leg and it thunks in like he's like, that's the thing. And then I read on my toxic trait is I do read the internet comments. I read it like on Reddit or somewhere, like another like emergency medicine professional was like, they had to have recorded the real sound. That's exactly what it sounds like. There's nothing else on the planet that sounds like that. And I was like, it's actually from Boom Library largely, but you know, it's like, there's some Foley in there, but I don't think that the Foley folks got that excited and actually displaced someone's hip. But anyway.
Not that we'll admit to anyway.
For sure.
Yeah.
You know, it's just tinkering, just like having the right layers and getting the timing of all those layers just right. You know, it's just time.
Bryan's being modest too. He did some pitch changes on the stage, and then Ed took over.
I just remember when Dr. Joe was saying, "Oh, needs more bottom end." I'm thinking, really? Because it just seemed like, man, this guy's, you know, poor hip is gonna like shoot across the room, you know. But he's like, "Oh, there it is," and I was like, okay, that's what it feels like. I don't want to be anywhere near that sound ever. That's a bad sound. In the only good way possible.
The show has a very documentary feel. You mentioned the steady cam. Like we feel like we're navigating our way through a real ER. It felt so real. Obviously, the sound played a massive role in that. The sound makes you cringe in a good way, like it's purposely making you cringe. And there are parts where the classic move of closing your eyes didn't work, you know what I mean? Because the sound is getting you more than the visuals.
Nice.
So thank you very much for talking to me today. It's been great. I heard that it got picked up for season 2, so I'm looking forward to that.
That is correct.
So are we.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Anytime, man. This was fun.
Thank you so much.
Big thanks to Bryan, Todd, and Ed for talking with me today. Stay tuned to the podcast feed because later this week, part 2 of the Tonebenders coverage of the amazing animated series Arcane is coming your way. Check out one of Sound Idea's latest new libraries, the General HD Volume 6, which brings over 4,000 new effects to add to your arsenal of sounds. From the deepest depths of the ocean to the highest peaks of the mountaintops, whatever the mood or circumstance, General HD 6 will cover it. This new library comes with rich metadata in UCS format and is available in 24-bit 96K resolution. Head over to sound-ideas.com to learn more. Tonebenders is produced by me, Timothy Muirhead. Theme music is by Jim Guthrie. You can reach me via email through info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow Tonebenders on Instagram to stay on top of new episodes. If you like the show, you can help us out by spreading the word to your friends and colleagues, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click support.